Okay. Well, thanks for coming out today. We are in Proverbs 25. We finished with Proverbs 24 last week. And we are going into these scriptures here. Just checking the audio levels. Okay. Proverbs 25:1. This is from Hezekiah's collection. Says there are two. These two are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. King Hezekiah had his men copy these Proverbs of Solomon. They are good, wise sayings for that are fit for a king and a kingdom of priests. You know, something that King Hezekiah, he was one that had these copied down, and just it says that in the first verse there. There's just giving some backstory to it. I'm not sure if the other Proverbs had just been, a collection already, and then Hezekiah found some more, and then just kind of put it there, or if he had a private collection of different writings and it hadn't been widely circulated yet, so then he copied it, had his men copy it. There may have been one or two copies of it already, but he probably made them just publish it more and make it widespread. But these are good wise sayings. They're very important because it's good advice for a king. Maybe this was a private collection of Solomon's writings, just that he had written specifically for kings, but it's something that is very great that we have them today. And it says in verse 2, God is honored for what he keeps secret. It is the glory of God to hide a matter or things. Deuteronomy 29:29. Kings are honored for what they can discover. It is the glory of kings to examine them. That's from the Expanded Bible. In Deuteronomy 29:29, it says, there are some things the Lord our God has kept secret, but there are some things he has let us know. He's revealed. These things belong to us and our children forever, so that we will do everything in these teachings, laws, and instructions. Something just how beautiful it is that there's hidden things that God has. There's certain things that people just don't understand in the world. The scripture is really a mystery to those that don't really understand it. To those that really haven't found Jesus, it really is just kind of this total mystery and this misunderstood thing. And it's something, though, when we come to really know Jesus and we become his disciples, there's these things that we find, these meanings that we understand. And it's something that it says kings are honored for what they can discover. It is the glory of kings to examine them. It's something I was watching a movie on the life of C.S. Lewis. It was the one with Anthony Hopkins in it. They left out one of his adopted sons, though, because he had two adopted sons. It was David and I'm trying to think the other name of the other young man, but these two young men, I think it was Douglas was the other one, I can't remember, but one of them, he followed in his parents' faith after his mom died and C.S. Lewis died. The other one, he said that he became Jewish, but he also suffered from schizophrenia, and just he, I think, died in a mental hospital a few years ago. His brother had mentioned it, but it's just really kind of sad. I don't know what happened in the end. Maybe he recommitted his life to Christ, or maybe he found Jesus in some way, but it's just sad. But in the movie, just seeing how C.S. Lewis comforted his son, after the passing of his mom, because he had lost his mom too at a young age, and just it's something that, there's these secrets, these things that you can pass on to your children, the gospel. And it's something that he was able to pass on to at least one of his sons, and maybe his other son might have come back to the Lord. I don't really know. But his other son I think his other son's still alive, though, so the one that's saved. But it's just something that, that there are these beautiful things that we can pass on. And kings are, honored for what they can discover.
What verse are you in?
Verse 2.
25:2?
Yes.
It says here that Solomon collected, okay,
Hezekiah?
these are written by Solomon, yet collected under the supervision of Hezekiah, king of Judah, some 270 years after Solomon's death.
Hmm. And isn't it something that this is something that took place 200 years after?
Almost 3.
Yeah, almost 300 years after, and how it was this hidden thing that it even talks about it. It says it says the glory. Yeah, God preserved it, but it says God is honored for what he keeps secret. It is the glory of God to hide a matter or things. It was almost like it was hidden for 300 years.
Well, it came up during the spiritual awakening here.
Yeah.
It says that King Hezekiah of Judah reigned over a time of national spiritual revival.
Mm-hmm.
He added these chapters to the previous collection of Proverbs, having found these yet to be published Proverbs of Solomon. So it says he found them.
Yeah. And isn't there something, though, in verse 2 of these found scriptures is the kings are honored for what they can discover. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, they have a surge.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing that, God, he even played it out that way, just like this is something hidden that I'll keep hidden for future generations. But it was the glory of a king to discover it. It brought honor to Hezekiah to discover these scriptures. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's all about timing.
Amen.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It mentions 1 Kings 4:32.
Mm-hmm.
It says, he also copied 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005 of Hezekiah.
Mm.
Okay, what was that? 1 Kings what?
1 Kings 4:32.
Wow. And Deuteronomy
Yeah, what was the one in Deuteronomy you mentioned earlier?
29:29. So there are some.
It says that Solomon, it's kind of confusing. Solomon excelled in wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
but it's mentioned in 1 Kings, I think, under the king of Hezekiah. Is that what he's saying?
Maybe.
Why does he mention the sons?
What verse is that?
Okay, 1 Kings what?
1 Kings 4:32.
Let's see.
This says, men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and all the kings of the east would hear of his wisdom.
Well, this is still talking about Solomon. So,
Yeah.
He
But
spoke
that's the reference
3,000. Okay, so it says he spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. So he described plant life from the cedars of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He also taught about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. Men of all nations came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. So he had a science class too for them, huh? It's pretty awesome.
Biology class, we had reptiles and fish and birds.
Let's go to verse 3. And I think.
Just
Go
to
ahead.
kind of interject
Mhm.
a thought I got.
Mhm.
I look at the wisdom. It's amazing. You see the wisdom that God gave Solomon, but I'm just looking at the history of American presidents, like George Washington.
Mhm.
I mean, God gave him wisdom, because they wanted to make him king, but he said no. He says, I'm going to be a president,
Mhm.
and he could have been the president as long as he wanted.
Mhm.
But he didn't even do that. I mean, and And if you go through history of the wisdom that God gave certain presidents, at that particular time in history, it's just, even like Nixon, God gave him wisdom on how to deal with Vietnam and, the problems that the nation was going.
The missile crisis.
Huh?
The missile crisis.
And the what?
Missile crisis.
Yeah.
That was Kennedy.
Oh, that was Kennedy.
I mean, Nixon, though, was able to calm it down, so it wasn't an issue anymore.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but I was looking at, Nixon had a lot to do also with how he dealt with the Russians and the Chinese as far as the nuclear arms race. But he did a lot of amazing things, and if you look at the Watergate, he won every state but one. I mean, he won more states than Reagan.
Yeah.
But he ended up in defeat because, he didn't acknowledge what the guys, it wasn't his idea to do the Watergate thing, it was the guys under him, but he just covered it up.
Yeah.
But still, God gave him tremendous wisdom to deal with some very difficult times,
Yeah. And
And I'll mention another one, but I don't want to offend anybody, but his name starts with a T, and it ends with a P.
what's really great
I don't want
is
to offend the Biden supporters.
what's really great is that just when I think what it was referencing in First Kings there is, it talked about how Solomon was researching all those things, that, he was really searching, he was really looking for those hidden things that God really has put in the world, because there's beautiful hidden things that we can uncover that, look at many cures for different diseases have been found looking in nature. And even like penicillin, the first antibiotic that they discovered, it was by accident. They saw mold. Yeah. There was moldy sandwich, and he noticed that bacteria wasn't growing around it, and he said, "Well, maybe there's something here that's killing the bacteria." And so he found that there was something in the mold that was killing the bacteria. It was penicillin, and just there's it's the glory of kings to find out things. I'm sure Solomon knew a lot of things that probably were never written down, or maybe they were written down and maybe it was lost. But yeah.
How did they move that, those large stones? I've heard it's by frequency. Intensity of frequency can lift objects.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are still a great mystery to us. Yeah, and just, but, it's something that God has hidden so many things. And it's the glory of kings to discover them, and that's what Solomon did as king. He found these things out, and it was beautiful for him. And I think that's what the connection is to the First Kings there.
Well, even in 1 Kings 3, where he says, "Give your servant an understanding mind and hearing heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge and rule this your great people?" God basically is offering, and this was in a dream, and he offers Solomon all this, whatever he wanted, but he didn't even ask for things. He didn't ask for great economy or peace against the enemies. He asked for wisdom, for understanding to govern. And God made him the wisest king that Israel ever had.
And that goes great into verse 3 here. The importance of governance is really highlighted here, at least in the Amplified. It says in verse 3, "As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the hearts and minds of kings are unsearchable." And in the Amplified, it says that the ancient rabbis explained this as a reference to the countless details of government that are a king's responsibility. It's something that a good leader has a lot to take in. Solomon had a lot to take in as a leader. And that's what he asked for. He asked the Lord, give me, understanding that I might govern. And that's something that it says the ancient rabbis explained this as a reference to the countless details of government that are a king's responsibility. And just how, when you really think about it, a leader has so much that they're responsible for. And it's really only by God's grace that any leadership does anything right. Because who's to say that one thing you do might not affect your nation in a negative way or a positive way? It could be one decision you make that really destroys a nation or really sets it on a new path. And so really being able to navigate those things is really important, and it requires a great deal of understanding and really God's favor. Leadership is not for the lazy or the unfit. I mean, Solomon was not lazy. He was constantly figuring things out. He was just researching, reading. He was always learning. And it says in Ezekiel, he said that I've read many books, and he really understood things really well. He worked really hard too. If you read Ezekiel, he said that he worked hard, that he, did all these things to build up the nation. And it's something that, a leader can't be lazy. Leadership is not for the lazy or the unfit. It's so important that a leader take charge and lead. Yeah. Well, that's, physically fit and mentally fit, everything. A leader's not someone who stands still either. Somebody who doesn't take charge, who just sits back and lets everyone else do their work for them. Yeah. In the last chapter, we read about a lazy person, how quickly everything around them will come to ruin. A little folding of the hands, a little closing of the eyes, and it's just, we're all called to lead in some way and in some area of our lives. Some are called to higher positions of leadership than others because, they're faithful in the little things. In Luke 16:10, it says, this is, one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. And if we look at that verse in greater context from like verse 9 through 12, it says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to make friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, they will welcome you into eternal dwellings. And whoever is faithful in very little will also be faithful with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will be dishonest in much. So if you have not been faithful with worldly wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And if you have not been faithful with the belongings of another, who will give you the belongings of your own? And what are true riches?
Revelation.
People, right?
Revelation from God.
Yeah, people though. People are the greatest rich.
That revelation.
Just how, people are such a great treasure. This is a treasure of heaven is people and God. Jesus is the greatest treasure of heaven. But if a person is dishonest, they can't be trusted to lead people. And money by itself is not wealth. Power and influence are more powerful than money. Jesus says people in the world know this, so they use money to buy influence. It's cronyism. But Christians, we should, we can use money to win people. We don't have to use people to win money.
John, verse 3, as the heavens are high, as the heavens for height, and the earth for depth, so the hearts and minds of kings are unsearchable. Then I think that's also in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
That when there's a king that got that position through, let's say, he overturned, he murdered the king before him that was a good king. I think that just as we see the wisdom of kings, of godly rulers. God, I've looked over, I've really been a real student of presidents. And since I was a kid, I heard Kennedy, and I remember this from 6th, 7th grade, that one of my teachers told me that Kennedy would read a stack of newspapers every morning before he started his day, because he wanted to know the heartbeat of America. I said, what diligence, to do that, that he would. And if Kennedy was president today, he'd be a conservative, You know, he wouldn't be a liberal because of what he did. But I remember hearing that and said, man, that takes a lot of, plus he had to be pretty smart. But you know, I think when a person has that position and God has given the person that position, gives them just supernatural ability to know things and understand things and understand the people and the things of the world, because America has been, at least in our generation, a world leader. You know, but when there's an ungodly king, you look at the blunders that we've seen in the past of ungodly presidents. You know how it's been it hurts so many people, and not only are people hurt, you know, our troops are killed. You know how many, you know, because of bad foreign policies. You know, troops were unnecessarily killed. Like I remember in Vietnam, I supported the troops, but I didn't like the way our government handled, our political leaders handled Vietnam.
Yeah.
And they were responsible for the death of almost 60,000 young men.
Not including all the Vietnamese that died.
Right, and the Vietnamese that suffered.
Yeah.
You know, but, you know, and that was just bad, you know, I'm not saying it was bad foreign policy because they wanted to stop communism, but the way they handled the war was wrong.
Yeah.
And all these young guys were killed, and some were my friends.
Well, a lot of it, you know, wasn't even to really fight a war. It was to, in many ways, they were transporting a lot of drugs in Vietnam. You know, they kept it going just so they can smuggle drugs into the United States and, you know, and put that in the inner cities. And
the black market, some people made a lot of money in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
You know, very illegally.
And then the
Just drugs.
weapons testings, the military-industrial complex profited heavily from it. And that was something that Eisenhower had warned about. You know, he said that a lot of these military-industrial corporations are really gaining way too much power. And he said that, you know, we can't let them take over because, you know, they'll run our wars and they'll basically, you know, corrupt our politicians with money. And he knew how dangerous it was. I mean, Eisenhower was an amazing thinker, talking about leaders, you know, that really were intelligent. I mean, Eisenhower was incredibly intelligent.
And you saw it firsthand.
Yeah.
The swamps spread around, I think since the 1800s or before that, 1700s.
Yeah, there's always been nefarious, you know, just persons that just haven't.
You know, and
Yeah.
not to just talk about politics, but to me it's just fascinating that when Nixon was president, you know, his mother had a prophecy that he was going to save Israel when he was a young boy. And she told him that. He never forgot that. And in 1973 was the 73 war in Israel. And it was you know, Nixon backing the Israelis that helped them to, you know, win. And I think that was one of the reasons I believe that the Lord honored, you know, President Nixon, was because he, like I said, it was wrong what he did in covering up. We all know that. But if you look at his presidency, he did a lot of really amazing things, and I believe it was God's choice. He was God's choice for that time.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely protected Israel.
Yeah.
Because Russia was talking about invading Israel at the time, and he said no way, and Russia backed off. But it's something just.
And he was really compassionate for our troops, you know, because when
he ended the war.
Yeah, I heard his speeches, and when he said we need to bring our boys home, he said they're dying needlessly, you know. And when I met him when I was in the Marine Corps, he treated me with real respect as a military. He knew I was a Marine. He saw my haircut. You know, he treated me like I was, you know, like he was really happy to meet me. And I think that's just the way, the heart that he had for our troops. That he was a good man, you know, and he just got caught up in that whole scandal of Watergate that ended his presidency, which it shouldn't have, but it did. You know, but I remember the good that he did.
Yeah. Good kings, leaders know what people know that people are our kingdom's most valuable asset. You know, and a good king will do his best to lift an entire nation to be prosperous because he cares about his people. You know, bad leaders only care about themselves, and they destroy nations and bring curses on their people because of their laziness and their dishonesty. If we go into verse 4 and verse 5, It says, "Take away the dross from the silver, and there comes out the pure metal for a vessel for the silversmith to shape. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. It will be honest and lasts a long time." If a king's throne is established in righteousness when the wicked are taken away, what happens to a king's throne when the wicked aren't taken away? When the swamp isn't drained?
You have a good example. You have a good example of what's going on now.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Department of Justice out of control. I mean, they always have been, but I mean, it's so much in your face nowadays.
Overreaching.
Oh my gosh, far beyond.
How about the 87,000 new IRS agents we're gonna get?
Mm-hmm.
What are they for? They're not just for looks.
And why are they getting 4,600 weapons and 15 automatic weapons? I mean, this is IRS agents. They're not, yeah,
So that they can answer your phone calls.
yeah.
With a weapon.
I mean, it's really out there. But, if a king, when a king, just as a silversmith has to remove dross from silver to make it pure, so must we put away wicked influences in our lives too, though. It's not just at levels of government, it's also in a personal level. We have to really weed out the wickedness in our lives, because we're called to lead too, and we have authority. And Paul warned in Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:1. He said, "Remember or know this: in the last days there will be many troubles, difficult, terrible times, because people will love themselves, love money, brag and boast, and be proud and arrogant. They will say evil things against others, speak abusively or blaspheme, and will not obey their parents or be thankful or grateful or be kind or be the kind of people God wants, holy and pious. They will not love others. They will refuse to forgive, reconcile. They will gossip, slander, and will not control themselves. They will be cruel and brutal, will hate and not love what is good. They will turn against their friends, be treacherous traitors, and will do foolish things without thinking, and they'll be reckless. They will be conceited, will love pleasure instead of God, and will act as if they serve God, having a form appearance of godliness and piety, but will not have his or deny his power. Stay away from and avoid those people." And in 1 Corinthians 5:11, Paul also said, "I am writing to tell you that you must not associate with those who call themselves believers in Christ, a brother or a sister, but who sin sexually, or are greedy, or worship idols, or abuse others with words, slander, or get drunk, or cheat. They swindle people. Do not even eat with people like that." We have to avoid people that have a bad habit of bad-mouthing other people. Really, anyone who bad-mouths anyone, they really need to consider their words. We have to be careful to avoid speaking curses over others, because we're called to bless and not curse. And the disciples, they didn't waste their time bad-mouthing the politicians of his day, or even the religious leaders. They knew who the enemy was influencing, and they knew that they directed their attacks directly at the devil, instead of at the politicians who were being controlled by the devil. It's something that just how, life is just too short to waste it, trying to score points for a political team, though. It's, so much more that, we know that if God isn't in charge of men's hearts, it doesn't matter who we vote for, because either side, left or right, if they're not controlled by God, they're going to be wrong leaders, and they're going to be terrible leaders. If God is in charge of our leaders' hearts, though, again, we don't have to worry who we vote for, because it's something that it wouldn't matter who we vote for if God isn't in charge. And wouldn't matter who we vote for if God is in charge, right? Because when God is in charge of men's hearts, it doesn't matter what team they play for. They're going to listen to God. And if God is in charge of our leaders' hearts, we won't have to worry what letter is next to the name of their, if they're a politician. And wouldn't it be nice to not have to worry which person wins an election?
I agree, Jonathan, but I disagree.
Yeah.
In this day and age, it's.
I think you need to look at the fruit of the person running for office.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're for all the debauchery,
Yeah.
they think that transgenderism is so great, if they think that abortion is a right, for a woman to murder her child, if they think that gay marriage is a great thing, if they think that opening the borders are okay, I think that, the lawlessness that's going on in our nation right now, I mean, look at the murder rate in our cities.
Well, those are precisely the people that I'm saying that aren't obedient to God, that aren't letting God take charge. I'm saying that if all of our leaders followed God, we wouldn't have to worry, because they would be doing the right things. They wouldn't be
That's
doing
utopia.
evil.
You're talking about utopia. I mean, it's
No,
not
I'm not saying
not
that.
like today.
Yeah.
That's not gonna happen until Jesus comes.
No, I'm just saying that we can also be pessimistic, though. I mean, because if you look at America, though, there was a time when it didn't matter which party you voted for. Both were good leaders. Yeah.
And we
'Cause
love
they-
to see that happen again.
Yeah. And we believe we can, because revival can change it.
It can't happen as long as people are open to the Lord.
Mhm.
There has to be a transformation.
Oh yeah,
But there's
it can
a
only
party-
happen with
there's a party
revival.
that said, we don't want God in our platform. I mean, when a party says that, I'm not gonna vote for that person if they don't want God to be a part of our system of government.
Nor would I suggest we would vote for that side, but it's something that, God can change a nation, though, so that, all our leaders are a reflection of Him and not a reflection of evil, and just, we really need to pray that, God change our leaders, and we know who influences it. Yeah, and we know who influences them. We know that the enemy is the one that behind them.
Yeah, because some
You know-
people won't change, no matter what, even God even says that.
Oh yeah, there's some people that are so seduced by the enemy that they want to keep on doing what they're doing. And God,
That's what I keep saying, in the tribulation, there's gonna be people that the judgment of God is falling on them and they're cursing God.
As they're dying.
Mhm.
As they're going to hell. I mean, how hard and how deceived and how hate you must be full towards, how much your heart is full of hate, that even when the judgment is falling on you, you're still cursing God.
Mhm.
So there's going to be, I think as we get closer to the coming of Jesus, we're going to see a greater separation between good and evil,
Mhm.
and the righteous and the unrighteous. It's inevitable,
Mhm.
and we're seeing it right now.
Yeah.
There's a separation of those who want evil and those who want righteousness. And I think
Mhm.
you said we're in a bloodless civil war.
We
I
are.
felt that during Obama's administration.
Mhm.
That he was such a divisive president. I said, he is going to lead our nation into a civil war, but not with guns. But we're going to be so divided. He did not unify. I thought he would unify the nation as a first black president. I was hopeful when he first got elected, and I even called his office in Chicago and congratulated. I said, please tell President Obama that I'm praying for him.
Mhm.
And I had hoped that he would bring, I said, man, a black man in the White House, he can bring our nation together. He did the opposite.
Mhm. And we know that God can still transform these people, because we know how we do know how depraved and wretched they are, but we know how wicked people can be changed. I mean, we look at Paul. The believers didn't want to believe that it was possible that Paul had given his heart to Jesus. The believers were like, no way. He's just trying to trick us. Don't go to him. Just stay away from him, because they could not believe that Paul had given his heart to Jesus.
Well,
Yeah, they-
sure, back in
But,
that day,
but Paul
Yeah.
thought that what he was doing was right before God.
Yeah.
He was deceived.
Hmm.
And I think
And these people are deceived too.
Yeah.
But we need to know that God is more powerful than their deception. And that God, He can open their eyes, and just like he did with Paul. And just we do need to pray for them that God would reveal himself to them and that he would destroy those works of darkness in their lives, because we don't want them to go to hell. We want them to be saved. We want them to know Jesus. And we know that it's possible that God can destroy every work of darkness.
But some
And-
of them are drunk with power.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
And they're not probably going to turn to the Lord until they lose that power.
yeah. And, well, that may have to happen, but we still have to pray for them to find Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I was about
yeah,
to say that.
yeah.
What was that?
You know how Paul was not.
People need to be knocked off their high horse.
Oh,
And, you
Yeah.
know, then the blinded, and then it has to be a deliverance when, they tell him to put that mud into his eyes and start looking for a man of God
Mhm.
to set him free. That's the only way.
Yeah.
The thing with Paul is he was working for God. He thought in his way he was honoring
He was
God.
killing the
Whereas
Jews.
he wasn't tipping the chalice to Baal,
Mhm.
like in Daniel, when they took the chalices that were holy and what's the word when you dishonored, this is a
Mhm.
better word for it, but they dishonored God's holy things, and so, and it was to Baal. So there's people that are in that camp, and it's gonna be a lot harder for them to change.
Mhm.
But look at the kings of Israel. All the kings of Judah, all the kings of Israel, because when it divided from Israel to Judah, there was the civil war, all the kings of Israel were evil. It said they all did evil in the sight of the Lord. In Judah, there was only a small number of kings that did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And I think that that's something we need to learn from political power. It's intoxicating when a person has a lot of authority.
Mhm.
It can blind them to not see their own, debauchery and their own sin and their own lust for power. And I see that because Israel, the Bible says, learn from Israel. He's telling the church, we're supposed to learn from Israel and learn from Israel because America is supposed to be a Christian nation.
Mhm.
If we were at Russia, if we're an atheistic, godless nation, I would say, whatever, but we're not. We're supposed to be a nation I was just reading, I have the Constitution here. I was just reading what our Constitution says in the Declaration of Independence. They were believers in Almighty God.
Those are sermons.
Yeah, it's amazing. This sounds like a Bible, something taken right out of the Bible.
It was.
And if we go back also into Timothy and Corinthians, here is a major issue is there are leaders that call themselves Christians that are not representing God.
I
And
heard a term for them.
yeah,
We have rhinos.
mhm.
Those are chinos. Christians in name only.
Christians in name only.
Say chinos.
But yeah, it's something that, that's exactly what Corinthians is talking about. It says, do not associate with those who call themselves believers in Christ. And I think that's really a major issue that we have in our country, is our leaders aren't supposedly pagan. We look at what they do behind the scenes and it's very pagan, but it's something that, they call themselves Christians. They go around parading themselves saying that they're Christians, but they believe in abortion. Say they're Christians, but they, believe in the murdering of innocent child.
How many politicians have come, and say, well, I'm a Christian, I don't believe in abortion, but yet I don't believe that I can impose my beliefs onto others. They try to weasel themselves out of that whole thing.
And then they pass legislation
Yeah,
that clearly
and-
supports abortion. Yeah.
Exactly,
Mhm.
and you find out they're actually supportive of killing babies.
Yeah. And that is something we have to be very aware of, is that there are snakes in the grass, and there are people that really have deceived themselves. And, something that the churches have to stand up and say something about people that call themselves Christians and support abortion and support transgenderism, support sexual debauchery, that support all this sexual immorality. and these evil things. Just as it says in Corinthians, who is sexually sin, greedy. Look at how many greedy politicians there are that call themselves Christians, that do wicked and corrupt things, insider trading and other backroom deals that shouldn't be done. And just, they still call themselves Christians, though. But we have to be very aware that, these people are anything but. And it's just so sad that, that more of them aren't called out, for their phony beliefs. Because if they were true Christians, they would be against sexual immorality. They would be against worshiping idols. They would be against greediness. They would be against abusing others with words. They would be against getting drunk. They would be against swindling and cheating people. But it says we aren't even to eat with people like that. And yet there are some that are politicians that believe in all that stuff, that exemplify all that, and are not living a Christian life. And yet some of them are still accepted into certain churches, and it's just really sad. But we have to take a stand. We have to really stand up as believers, because ultimately, if we don't take a stand, we're really going to be squished, and we have to stand up to the enemy. But
Jesus said in Matthew 24, one of the signs of the last days is false Christs and false prophets.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think what you just said about these politicians who say they're Christians, or I'm a Catholic, because
Mm-hmm.
Catholics are part of the Christian church,
Mm-hmm.
technically.
Mm-hmm.
So if they say I'm a Catholic, and they don't adhere to the Catholic Church's, standards of,
Of morality.
Yeah, what the Catholic Church stands for.
Yeah.
Then they're false Christs
Mm-hmm.
or false Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when the Bible talks about, the Christian faith, we're the body of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So if I represent Jesus well, I'll be a true Christian.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't, I'll be a false Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could be what Jesus meant about the false Christ.
Yeah.
There'll be people in the church that say, I'm a Christian, but you look at their life, they're immoral, they're lustful, they're greedy, they're not honest.
And the same thing happened in Rome, and Rome eventually fell under supposedly Christian leadership. I mean, we know that they were still doing the evil pagan things that the previous pagan emperors were doing. But, when Constantine made Christianity the official religion of Rome, he really made it popular to call yourself a Christian. It didn't matter if you were or not. It just became a popular thing to do because you got all the fringe benefits of calling yourself a Christian. Because you're like, oh yeah, I can trust you. I can do business with you. And, it's just this became this popular thing to call yourself a Christian because the government made it beneficial to call yourself a Christian. And so there was a lot of phony Christians during the time of Constantine, and a lot of them still practiced paganism. A lot of them still did wicked things. And
that's how the Catholic Church started.
That's how the Catholic Church started. And we see just kind of the fruit of that in just this popularized Christianity that has nothing to do with Christ. It's a social club. We see how it affects people because it has nothing to do with the relationship with Christ. It has everything to do with what club are you a part of? I'm part of the Christian club. Well, you're cool. I can be around you. And it has nothing to do with the relationship with Jesus. And that's something that, phony Christians have been around since Constantine. Because before Constantine, you couldn't really be a phony Christian because you were executed if you were a Christian. You had to be a real Christian. But under Constantine, he made it popular to be Christian. And so we have to understand that real Christians are persecuted. And we do have to fight darkness, though. And
well, look at Hollywood. If you look at the old stars during World War II, most of the big stars, some of them even went to war.
A lot of them did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they fought for freedom and they fought to liberate, people in other lands. And if you look at some of the stars back in the golden age of Hollywood, there were some amazing people in Hollywood, that, were, very patriotic, and they were conservative.
And there was moral standards too.
Right.
I mean, because
Not all of them,
Yeah.
but some of them were.
yeah, I mean, as far as perception went, like when the movies, they didn't allow certain things in movies,
There were
just
standards.
yeah.
There were standards, you couldn't cross those standards,
Mhm.
you had to stay within those standards. And if you didn't meet them, they
Mhm.
wouldn't go forward with anything.
Yeah,
So-
and people kept pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope, and it just
It was incrementalism,
Mhm.
and it's just throughout the decades. Slowly but surely, they add something here. Nobody said anything, okay, let's add a little bit more. Let's
Mhm.
do this, or show more skin over here.
yeah.
Or a little bit more risque,
And the church wasn't pushing back. In
Yeah.
fact, a lot of the things where they pushed a lot of that stuff was in historical dramas. Like, oh, well, it's okay to show a little skin because it's historical, and just like that was one way that they pushed it. And, it's just a little leaven leavens a whole lump. We see how, those little compromises really took the whole bag and just destroyed a lot of our American society just with, this incremental inclusion of different levels of debauchery. And just this compromise with the world has really grown more and more in a lot of people. And Christians need to be uncompromising.
I was listening to Jerry Seville talk. He said, when I was a kid in the 50s, he says in Hollywood, it was against Hollywood standards for you to mention just the word pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
He says they even show you, they not only mention the word pregnant, they show you how to get pregnant on
Mhm.
screen. He said, but when I was a kid growing up, he says he remembers watching TV, and he studied it, that you couldn't even mention the word pregnant. It was a no-no.
If you go back even further to the 20s, they felt even depicting Christ in a movie was making a graven image. So like if you watch the original 1920s version of Ben-Hur, they don't actually show Jesus on screen. Like they have him talking, and I think they maybe show his arm or something, but they don't do a full-on depiction of Jesus Christ in that movie because they didn't want to make a graven image. And it's something that, that was a standard in the 20s, and just it's something how far America is removed from that. And just it's something just how much people just kept letting in. And, a lot of the things that were let in by people that were very depraved. Hollywood has a long history of depravity. You look at current Hollywood and just the things that they keep getting busted with. I mean, that's nothing new. They just kept swept it under the rug. But they've been doing awful things for a long time. And those people were allowed to continue into that sin. And it just really, through little seeds here and there, they just kept planting these awful things that just got worse and worse. But we can plant things that'll make things better and better. Because we have a glory that's ever increasing. I think, should we read another verse? But it is possible that when the people of God take their rightful place of authority, that they can change the culture too. Because we did see Rome change, even though it was little by little, Rome did eventually become not as evil in a lot of ways, but in some ways they swept it into the church, which was pretty awful. So, but that's when the church again compromised. The church wasn't the church, and that's where the church needs to be the church and can't compromise, because when the church lets that stuff in, that's when things really go just downhill really fast. And we saw Rome fall, we saw the Dark Ages, we saw, it wasn't until the Renaissance. And you look at during the Renaissance, what happened? There was even before the Renaissance, there was the Protestant Reformation, and just how that really, I think, sparked a lot of the Renaissance in other areas, just because people stood up against superstition and realized, they had to worship the God of the Bible and not the superstitions that they had been taught. Because Rome had just taught superstition; it didn't teach the Bible. They didn't allow people to Latin became a dead language, and the Bible was translated into Latin, and people weren't allowed to read it. There were still, of course, Coptic Christians and Christians in Greek Orthodox that held on to Bible reading, but there was many Christians, the large majority, that had just not even been allowed to read the Bible or couldn't read the Bible because it was in a dead language. And so, when Martin Luther read the Bible and then he translated it into German, he really sent it for the masses. And then it got translated into English, and we saw what it did in England. So the power of the gospel is transformative, and we can see it really change society for the better, because it was the Puritans that spawned America. Their love for the Bible caused people to be well-read and well-educated in America, and that started our founding fathers on their path to, unite the country and to start something new, something fresh. And we had a great revolution. And it's something that England, if you look at the French Revolution versus the English Revolution, the English Revolution was largely spawned by revival, and that, transformed that nation, whereas the French Revolution was not spawned by revival. And you look at how many people died in the French Revolution, how terrible it was. And just, we can have another French Revolution, or we could have a revival like England did. But I pray for the latter, because revival is so much better. And we know that God can change the world. But I think it's a good place to stop there. I think we'll get to the next verses next time.
Jonathan, I was looking at famous athletes that fought in the wars. Like Roberto Clemente says he was 10 years in the Marine Corps.
I didn't know he was a Marine.
Yeah. And Ty Cobb was in the war, I think World War I. Bill Bradley, of course, we know him, a Rhodes Scholar, former senator.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the military during Vietnam. And Rocky Bleier got this, famous Pittsburgh Steeler, tough guy. He was wounded in Vietnam and got the Bronze Star.
Well,
So there's, of course, we know Ted Williams was a fighter pilot, and and Jimmy Stewart was the B-17, right?
he was a pilot, yeah.
Yeah. So it's amazing, some of these guys and, that served in the war that, were very, oh, it's just seen the lightning.
It was, I
He
know,
said, the Lord is saying, okay, shut your mouth.
I keep getting a warning, thunder, severe thunderstorm here.
On top of it.
Speaking of warnings, that thunderbolt in front of the
White House?
White House, was that a prophetic warning?
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think it was.
yeah.
Was
somebody killed or?
I think
Three people were killed, and
Wow.
4 injured. Yeah, well, four were hit struck.
The lightning missed the wrong person? Was that what you're saying?
I think it was a little.
A
So
warning shot across the line.
Yeah.
I think what we'll do is we'll close here, and
You better be close.
all right. But thank you for joining us online, and